Hello YouTube, it's me Jeudy and I'm here. Ranked has now been going on Secluded Springs for about 7 days now. At least that's what my stream says. I've been streaming for 7 days of Ranked. I'm currently in the top or just outside the top 100. I've been playing so much, brain is fried. But I do think that with all of that playing, I do kind of have a really good understanding of what the meta is like. So I present to you guys 5 tiers. Tier 1, these are going to be the meta decks. Tier 2, these are going to be the decks just right below that are also seeing a lot of usage. Honorable mention, so this is kind of spoiling one of the tier 1 decks, right, is the Suicune killer tier. If you've played rank for even just a minute now, you have seen Suicune like every other game. So these guys are not necessarily better than some of the tier 3 decks, and in a lot of ways they're worse than some of the tier 3 decks, but because of their notoriety and being able to beat Suicune, they are just slightly above the tier 3 decks. The tier 3 decks are viable. Like if you told me you're using this deck on ladder, I think that's fine. There are going to be a few decks I missed, so like if you have a comment for a deck I missed, just be like, where's Scrimblow Bimblow? And I'll be like, I think Scrimblow Bimblow is viable or YouTube content, but definitely not tier 2 or 1, or maybe it can be a Suicune killer. It's about the most for other decks. So without further ado, let's get into this. This is going to be primarily focused on ranked, and what better deck to run on ranked right now than Suicune Greninja. Like I said, it is everywhere and it is extremely versatile. It's a 20 card deck with like honestly like so many tech cards. I did just make a video on the mirror match and showed all the different cards you can consider in this deck, and this deck is a kind of card because there are a lot of decks that beat Suicune Greninja in theory. However, due to like when you actually play the game, they have so many ways to play around it, right? If you're an Ori deck, Ori is super popular week 1. They were double Irida around you, right? If you were like, they have just so many built-in counterplay that an Ori killer tomorrow, like a Suicune killer might not fully be a Suicune killer. This is the best deck that you can probably use on ranked if you want something new, right? Like it is really strong. It has a few weak matchups, and obviously as I go through this tier list, I'll like keep referencing Suicune because Suicune is the de facto top dog of this meta, and its number 2 is quite simply going to be Darkrai. How many times have I already talked about Darkrai being at the top of the meta? It's been since Shining Revelry, and Shining Revelry was what, like 5 months ago, 4 months ago, way too long. So I don't know. It's just kind of crazy that it is still the guy. It is still the guy, A2B, right? So that's like way too many months of tier 1 Darkrai Tina, and I would argue that it's at its strongest given its good matchup into Suicune Gren. However, some of the things that beat Suicune Gren are primarily a lot of Oricorio decks. Not they all beat it, like there are going to be some that are beat it, but because people are throwing Oricorio decks at like the wall, you kind of get Oricorio taxed, and you don't really want to run the Nihilego version too much because that's just going to give you more bench to deal with something like the Suicune Gren, and Suicune Gren will love more bench. So it's kind of really weird where you just kind of have to take that. Oricorio matchups are going to be really hard, and there is an abundance of Oricorio decks, more so now than ever, especially with the introduction of Raichu. Jumpluff Ori, speaking of an Oricorio deck, this one is YouTube content. Jumpluff is just bad. That is really it. It really pains me. Jumpluff is one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, but it just doesn't do enough compared to all the other Oricorio decks that we will get to, right? Jumpluff Oricorio is just like you're dealing 70, retreating back, dealing 70, retreating back. Suicune has Greninja. Greninja will ping Cyrus anything. Greninja also just beats Oricorio, and you're dealing 70, which is easily irritable. Heck, Oricorio itself deals 70 to Suicune, so it's really not an impressive deck, and it is unfortunately going to be YouTube content. I don't know what would make this card good, but right now in its current iteration, it is fun. And I think kind of the hardest, let's talk about a deck that I considered a top 3 deck of the last set was Espeon Sylveon. And I'm going to say it, guys, it is tier 3. It is nowhere near as good as it was. Recent tournament results kind of showing it had the drop. Originally, people were like, oh, this deck is good into the Suicune Gren stuff. However, that actually proved to be false as they started adding Giratina as the main guy. And Giratina, really easy to deal with this comp. You're trying to keep your bench close to your chest, and what this actually ends up doing is limiting your plays, right? Eevee Box is a deck that wants to fill their bench so that you can do plays like Sylveon, you can do plays like Sylveon EX Draw 2, right? You can't really do that. It's Suicune's limiting factor. And this is going to make Espeon Sylveon one of the weaker decks. It's still viable. It's still, you will climb high with this deck, but it losing to Suicune Gren, losing to Darkrai Gira, and then also things that counter Suicune Gren like Guzlord. So no longer does Guzlord play with Nihilego, no longer is Guzlord Nagananda, it's just Guzlord 17 trainers, and this is going to be the first deck in tier 2, and one of the reasons why Espeon sucked, right? Going early on, when Espeon was still being played a lot in high ladder and just ladder in general, the introduction of Guzlord being a good deck into Suicune Gren while also being a good deck into Espeon Sylveon just further cemented that Espeon Sylveon was kind of cooked, kind of buttered. And while Guzlord is a Suicune killer in its own right, it has also gained more than just being a Suicune killer. It has lines into a lot of the Oreo decks while being weak into that Darkrai Gira. So it's really cool to see that this deck rising above the honorable mention of a Suicune killer. So if we go to like, what is a Suicune killer? What would I tier as a Suicune killer compared to a tier 2 deck? That's going to be your Executor. No longer YouTube content, chat. This is a deck that does beat it, that does deal with Suicune pretty effectively. You can Memory Light into Eggy. Eggy will pop open and hit pretty high damage numbers, right? 150 is actually going to be good into Darkrai. 150, you actually destroyed the Guzlord deck. So it has like a pretty good matchups across the board. However, you are flipping coins. That is the issue. This deck will, despite having good, like, quote unquote, good matchups into these decks, you flip a coin, you get tails, you will feel the frustration. I've been trying to get footage for this deck for a bit, and I'll get like a small win streak and then immediately back to losing 2, and I'm like, I'm over this, let me just go back to Suicune Greninja. But it is an honorable mention. Players like Seagun, lots of players have noted hitting like high within the top 100. They were striking while the iron is hot, but now that this deck is kind of out there, I don't feel comfortable putting it in tier 2, so I'll call it a Suicune killer. Other decks that are kind of a Suicune killer that I made a video on was Mutina, right? Mutina does great if you're only playing against Suicune, but it really does struggle, especially when you're playing against Darkrai Gira or you're playing against Guzlord. But what it does do into Suicune Gira Gren is really cool. I'll say that you can even drop Mewtwo from this list. Let's just call this Giratina 18 trainers, right? Psychic Energy. This deck does do really good into Gira, Suicune Gren, but it does unfortunately end up losing a lot of the time to decks like that Guzlord, right, that we talked about, to every other deck, and that's kind of where its weak spots kind of show. If you want a Suicune Gren killer that is also just a really good deck in general, it is Arceus Darkrai. Dark Arceus. It's the deck that plays like 4 babies, Darkrai, God himself, Arceus, and Komala, Takeo, or Aquarius. This is like a 9 to 10 basic deck. And it has an insanely good matchup into Suicune because the babies charge an Arceus, and they don't really care about your bench because you're stacking red, you're stacking Darkrai, you deal 150, 170. It's a really fast deck. The deck's really biggest struggle is its own inconsistency. Sometimes you just will not have, like, even though you have so many babies, you can sometimes just start baby or Arceus start or Darkrai start. You are playing double leaf, but the deck doesn't have really flexibility room, like should be running cards like Repel, because you're running so many basics. And obviously I think better decks will probably drop like a Komala. Honestly, I think one Komala is enough, but that is where this deck really struggles, is just that it is a 10 basic deck in a 20 card game. Very inconsistent at times, but it is, when it pops off, it's really, really freaking strong. Another deck that I feel is popping off in a big way right now is Raichu Pikachu. Raichu Pikachu is, if you have seen it, it's like Raichu, Zeraora, Pikachu, Tapu, Koko. It is a really, really strong deck that actually is Oricorio-less, but it is really, really fast, right? You are charging either a Pikachu or a Koko. You have the electric energy shifter, and it's really, really cool to see a deck like this pop off. It's really good into Suicune Gren. Really good into like the Guzlord stuff, right? It's really hard to stop when you have so much energy generation coming from all points of your bench. And it's seeing a lot more popular on High Ladder. It's going to get there. If I can show, I could probably show off a deck. Like, we can just probably go to decks, and there is going to probably be like a Raichu Pikachu deck, right? That is still like, it's still like a relatively new deck. This one was Raichu Pika. If we go to the Froggy X, I'll show you guys, because I think that this is a really cool deck that is kind of new, right? It's kind of popping off. This is the Raichu Koko version, right? I put Pika, but like, yeah, like this is really, really cool stuff. It's really, really fast. It has the Repel, the Cyruses to like really pick and choose where you want to hit. And of course, like the Zeras are still going to be really, really good when dealing with Oricorio, right? You have a Rocky on a front guy like a Raichu, and if the Ori ever attacks, you can sweep in with Zera. Really, really cool. This guy's going on a really, really good tournament run so far. Look at all of these different decks that he's beaten. Like I said, Suicune Gren, also really good into Gira Darkrai because it's such a fast deck. So it's really cool to see that Raichu, a dog, a beast, legendary beast I didn't really feel would be strong, making a lightning deck that is Oricorio-less for the first time in like a long time. And of course, unfortunately, this you may be like, where's Entei? Where's the dog? And this at this point where I tell you that Entei is YouTube content. There is not a single good partner for Entei at the moment, and it really, really does suck. And all of those partners are straight YouTube content. It doesn't really synergize with anything. Well, there is a Entei Solgaleo deck that's going around, but that's just a Solgaleo deck, and you're using Entei to draw because it's slightly better than Suicune because it doesn't take Oricorio damage. But that's really its best place. If I was to put that Solgaleo deck somewhere, I'd put it tier 3, like viable. But I'm not going to be tiering it today because I didn't get a picture made for it. But yeah, just picture that Entei Solgaleo deck, tier 3 viable. More tier 3 viable decks is Gren Ori. It was super popular early on, but it turns out that anything Gren Ori can do, Suicune Gren can do better and faster. And that is why, while Gren Ori has really amazing matchups across the board, really good into Darkrai, really good into like the Arceus Darkrai deck, really good into Guzlord, it is so slow. It is so slow. And these other decks will outpace you. So unfortunately, going to take the tier 3 viable deck that was super strong early in other formats is not as strong as it can be in this format. Another deck, kind of, I think one of my final tier 2 decks is going to be Arceus Ori, Arceus Pichu Ori, Arceus Pichu, you know, that type of deck. I think that is the current best Arceus deck, or the best Oricorio deck. I'll bring up another Ori deck, Silvally Pichu. I think Silvally Pichu is pretty close, but unfortunately it's just a little bit weaker because of like Arceus's like damage is like really, really good. Dealing 130, plays really good at pinning Suicune and also really good at hitting the Darkrai Giratinas, and the damage ranges just feel so good. So Arceus Ori is going to be one of the better Ori decks you can use. I feel like all Ori decks are good. That's why I put them mostly in viable at worst, because they are just good decks. They do like suffer from certain issues, but they are just good decks. Another honorable mention, Suicune Killer. This Judiscon pops up from time to time. It is Tapu Koko 18 trainers. It destroys Suicune Greninja. Like, if you don't get a Giratina setup, you are just getting farmed. It is super fast. It is kind of ridiculous how fast it is. And it is really cool. But I don't know its matchups enough to put it outside of this. Like, if I think that if I want to use a other Koko deck, I would just use the Raichu Pikachu deck that's been doing as good, Raichu Koko, right? But this deck, if you just want to farm all of these Suicune players, you are just going to play. It is a 18 trainer Koko deck. You lose to Ori, who cares? You're playing to play specific matchups. You're fishing these matchups, and you fish them well. With Giovanni, you can KO babies as well. So really, really cool to see, but it is just like kind of one of the weaker decks, right? And that's like fine. There's nothing wrong with being a weaker deck, you know? I like the weaker decks. It's the stronger decks that scare me. Charizard Sylveon is honestly nowhere to be seen. It's seen like I play it like once every like 50,000 games. It gets farmed by Suicune Gren, it gets farmed by Guzlord. The baby stuff is just really, really fast. There's so many Oricorio decks, so it ends up being weak, very weak. I think stage 2 Pokemon in general in a really, really bad spot. And I don't know what the fix is right now. Maybe Mega Pokemon are the fix, but right now stage 2 Pokemon, awful spot. And also like even when you get set up, you just lose to Suicune Gren. They kind of farm you down, so it's like really, really hard place to be. Shout out to Charizard. You were once the GOAT. Now you're like the coat, the woke maybe. Another deck it's like between tier 2 and like an honorable mention. I think it's the best Suicune killer that's going to be on this list. Like, I mean, if you want only Suicune killing, it's going to be Koko. I'll put this in tier 2. It's going to be Flareon Magby. Flareon Magby has good matchups into all the Ori decks while also having a good matchup into Suicune Gren. It is the best Eevee box deck. You'll notice that Flareon Leafeon isn't in this. Leafeon is more of a hindrance now, unfortunately. So Flareon Magby, strongest Eevee box deck. This deck's now run like double red. I've made a YouTube video on it. It is really, really consistent at what it does. Of course, Suicune Gren players kind of understand the matchup, so it's going to get like slightly weaker. I can see it just like drop back into being just an honorable mention. It's definitely the weakest tier 2 deck in my mind, but it is really good at what it does. It can also overwhelm Darkrai Gira because you're given so many turns, but you do need that Magby start. Otherwise things can get pretty awkward, but otherwise really good deck. Don't really have complaints. You'll notice like a lot of these decks that are in the top, specifically 3 of these tier 2 decks are using babies, and that's because Suicune Gren kind of gives you some time to do so. Darkrai Gira also gives you time, so decks that can blitz them tend to be really good, or tiered slightly more higher decks that like slow things down like Guzlord tend to be a little bit higher than normal. Another deck that I will just put in the honorable mention for Suicune killing is Dragonite Pichu. Dragonite Pichu, maybe it's just a tier 3 deck, but so I'll probably just actually lie and put it over here. It's like really good into Suicune Gren. It's really good into Darkrai Gira. Its biggest weakness is itself. The other problem with cards like Suicune drawing so much, and this is going to be the problem for Eggy as well, is that and obviously it's going to be a problem for stage 2, right? Stage 2 is just in a poopy spot. Decks draw too many cards, therefore every deck is Tekken Mars, every deck is Tekken Red Card, and it has been for the worst, right? It's been for the worst for decks like Dragonite Pichu, because, you know, these cards really want to combo. Babies don't work with evolutions, so you can't, like, you have to like keep the Dragonite Evo in hand, and by the time you're doing that, it's very risky. You're playing a multicolor deck. Really, really rough time to be a Dragonite Pichu player. So this deck is going to just kind of be on the same level. It's very close to being a Suicune killer, but stage 2s, it's really, really hard to recommend. I'm running double hand rape in my deck as well. So it's like just really, really sad time to be. Donphan, Memory Light stuff, the flail stuff, that's YouTube content. I think it's like if you want an actual fighting deck that like does stuff, flail is super easy to play around, especially with, like I said, Giratina. If you want, it's Silverly Ramp, and even Silverly Ramp is just going to be a very viable deck. It's going to be very viable, especially because there are a lot of decks running around that are weak to fighting, right? And those decks are going to try to beat Suicune. So the decks that beat Suicune tend to lose to Silvally Ramp, and this is why Silvally Ramp tends to have good tournament runs now. Except, you know, it's just a bracket fisher, and that's kind of all it tends to be. Another deck, Raichu Mag, I think is a weaker version. It is kind of just like, it's like pretty close to YouTube content. I would not recommend this deck. I think the Raichu Pikachu deck is way better. But if you were to use it, it's like viable, I guess. It's like has like an okay matchup if you can draw everything and not get red card Mars, right? out of the wazoo, so this is going to be one of the weaker decks. Altaria Silvally, or any Altaria deck, is unfortunately going to be YouTube content. There's like a Lugia deck I played early on, which was very fun with Altaria, but Silvally is just like in a weak spot, and you're just playing an extra Silvally. In the final deck, Buzzwole, another member of that top 3, is currently kind of fate unknown. I play it like once in a blue moon, I'm like, oh my god, you're still alive. But because of that, it is very much a weaker deck. It's a deck that wants to fill bench as well, but you really can't fill bench. If you're filling bench, you are getting Suicune out the wazoo. But it cannot be denied how good it is into so many of the decks around it. It's so good into Darkrai Gira still. It's amazing into Guzlord. But it depends on your bracket, right? The Pikachu deck is kind of really rough on it because it's so fast, and like if they get Pika set up, it's really rough. So I am unsure on where Buzzwole should be, but it's a meta deck. It's viable. It's super viable. It's still consistent. It's just, is it fit right now with like how strong Suicune Greninja is? I don't know, right? I don't know. But this is pretty much my meta tier list. If there's a deck that I didn't include, it's either YouTube content, tier 3, or a Suicune killer. I think the tier 2 decks are pretty set, right? I think that Suicune Gren is the best deck in the format right now. Maybe Darkrai Giratina is the better deck, but they're both really freaking good, so it doesn't really matter. They're interchangeable. Darkrai Giratina will just always be viable, and it's doubly so when it has a good matchup into Suicune Gren, like 55 to 60 over it, so like that's always going to be good. Guzlord is one of the better decks, right? It's good into Ori build, it's good into Suicune Gren, and it's just like really cool to see like this deck be that consistent while having so many outs. Really weak into like the grass decks, can struggle into Darkrai Gira, but can also play through those. Arceus Darkrai is probably one of the best decks that you can bring into Suicune Gren while being just so good into everything. Its only real weakness is that consistency issue, but it can streak. Raichu Pikachu, I think, is the best Raichu deck, best Lightning deck that isn't an Ori build. There's so many Ori builds. Like, if there's an Ori build you have that I didn't list, it's probably tier 3 or like a honorable mention Suicune Killer. The real issue with Ori builds is that Greninja tends to KO it. So that's why I really like Arceus Ori, because you're building up to this threat that threatens the entire existence of that deck. Flareon Magby is one of the best Suicune Killers, as well as doing good into Ori, because baby Flareon does good into all the Lightning decks. So this deck just tends to have a pretty positive matchup. Its weakness, again, being a baby deck, is kind of similar to Arceus Darkrai, but less so, because you're not playing 10 basics, but you are playing to find them. Koko 18 trainers, Suicune Killer. All the Suicune Killers are pretty standard. They are not as good. Like I said, like I think Espeon, Sylveon, I think Buzzwole, Celesteela are better decks, right, than these decks. But like, does it really matter? Like, kind of not really. Because these decks are doing a role that's really important. Buzzwole, I can see rise up as this meta goes. It's only been week 1. Silvally Rampardos is just the best fighting deck. Really good at and really efficient at farming all these Lightning decks, at farming quite a few of these decks, but at the end of the day, it's still Silvally Rampardos. Gren Ori is a great Ori deck with an amazing power matchup into Darkrai Gira, but it flounders in front of Suicune Gren. That's going to be its real downside. Silvally Pichu is one of the better decks into Suicune Gren, but then loses pretty, like, is a Ori deck that struggles with Darkrai Gira. D-Knight Pichu is a Suicune killer, but is an inconsistent one. Zard Sylveon, you'll play like every 100 games. And like, it's still like bullies quite a few decks, but the presence of Ori, the presence of Suicune Gren being so good, and Guzlord being a deck that you'll commonly pop up into really sucks. Raichu Mag is on the lower side of viable, but again, it's an Ori deck, so like it has to be a little bit viable. And that is kind of where I am. If you guys have any questions, thoughts, or if there's like a deck that I didn't tier, like I didn't tier Sylveon Gren, I guess that can be viable. But like, do you want to use a viable deck, or do you want to use like a good deck? Like, you know, that's kind of where I'm at. But yeah, be sure to like, subscribe, yada yada, bada bada. I'll probably be streaming after this. I've been streaming daily, so like, yippee.